The character known in BattleTech history as Hanse Davion the Fox was born in 2983 as Hanse Adrian Davion in the Royal Palace of New Avalon, the capital world of the Federated Sons. He was the second son of then First Prince Andrew Davion and his wife Jennifer Kemple, having an elder brother named Ian Davion and their eldest half-sister Marian Davion from an affair their father had with Simon Sinclair prior to his marriage. At this time, their father Andrew was finishing the purges of dissident officers inside the armed force of the Federated Sons, especially since the successful destruction by the entire Davion Brigade of Guards of 5 renegade regiments from the Warriors Cabal, an aristocratic society of MechWarriors who had assassinated First Prince Peter Davion II in 2961 due to his actions at diluting their power within the AFFS. This internal struggle came at a price, as both the Capellan Confederation and the Draconis Combine took this opportunity to launch numerous attacks across their respective borders, which forced the Federated Sons on the defensive for decades to come. However, First Prince Andrew Davion skillfully managed his limited resources to prevent any major gains from his foes, while removing the last of the MechWarrior elites and reducing the authority of the lesser nobles across the Federated Sons. Both Ian and Hanse would be raised in Davion's tradition of military service and the desire to be the defenders of their nation. However, since Hanse wouldn't inherit the throne, he was free from the many obligations faced by his elder brother, which allowed him to pursue his own interests and be exposed to numerous people from diverse living backgrounds and to learn about their personal interests. One of its closest youth companions was Arden Sortek, son of Adrian Sortek, an AFFS officer, baron and close friend to First Prince Andrew. Together, they will embark on many mischievous adventures, such as trying to swim across the Olsen Channel. In his teenage years, Hanse divided his time between schoolwork, a cheerful pursuit of attractive young women, and a growing interest in government. While still a young man, he proved that he could easily navigate the New Avalon's Byzantine political circles by personally negotiating a settlement between the Davion family and the maintenance union of the Royal Palace, thus preventing a nasty strike. This brought him to the attention of many government figures, who recognized his political savvy and thus expected Hanse to grow up and become a prominent commander within the AFFS, or the federal bureaucracy. By 3007, Hanse Davion graduated from the prestigious Albion Military Academy with honors as a MechWarrior. His student file showed him to be a natural leader, but also having a penchant for unconventional thinking, which will be a defining mark for the remainder of his military career. Once he entered the AFFS, Hanse quickly worked his way up the ranks, proving himself more than a son of a former First Prince or the brother of the current one, since Ian Davion was ruling the Federated Sons on 2999. His early military actions as a junior officer with the 3rd Regimental Combat Team Davion Guards saw him filling the position of a lance commander, piloting his favorite mech, a BLR-1G Battlemaster he named Cadmus. During the Battle of Benton Hill, In 3008, Hanse showed little respect for battlefield conventions. He would attack or defend with curious, if not downright bizarre, tactics. Only the fact that his quirky ideas often led to such spectacular successes saved the Davion family from the embarrassment of a court-martial. Nevertheless, as a skilled warrior and leader, Hanse has earned the trust of his men. And these traits, along his political acumen, allowed him to survive through the years on his assignment to Capellan March in 3011. At that time, his brother Ian was known as the Hound, due to his preference for combat over politics and matters of statecraft. And with his focus on the Draconis Combine, the Capellan March was left to fend for itself against the predations of the Confederation. And its logistic was eroded by corruption, despite political efforts by Duke George Asik and Field Marshal Ivan Davion, and the successes of units such as the Wolf Dragoons to stem the Capellan tide. Rising quickly through the ranks, Hanse Davion was by now the commander of the 3rd RCT Davion Guards. Despite being only 28 years old, Hanse had already lived through enough battles to be called a marksman, the mech-warrior equivalent of an ace. With his early tendency towards unorthodox tactics, mellowed when experience taught him how often the old way still worked. On 3011, Hanse was appointed as military governor of New Aragon, a system conquered from the Capellan Confederation 3 years prior by the Wolf Dragoons. The very next year, under the aegis of Ivan Davion, he was then given the task of rebuilding the entire military structure within the Capellan March. Between the convoluted political atmosphere at New Aragon, with its hostile population, and the challenges of rebuilding the logistics of a military force mostly under the command of a March Lord, Hanse got quite the first-hand education in politics. His 2 years of handling such a powder keg made him a seasoned administrator, and many political figures within the Federated Sons saw him as a potential holder for the position of Prince Champion, with the idea that the two brothers would be working together in the governance of their nation. On the other hand, his current position within the Capellan March soon put him in direct conflict with its newly appointed March Lord, Duke Michael Hanse Davion, his brother-in-law by marriage with his half-sister, and a political rivalry began during 3013, which will never see a peaceful conclusion between both individuals. By the end of October 3013, Hanse Davion received the news that his brother Ian Davion died during the 3rd Battle of Mallory's World against the Draconis Combine. With little time to grieve his lost brother or to reflect upon the twist of fate that made him the newly designated First Prince, he embarked on an interstellar journey to reach New Avalon for his coronation, during which he was saved from an assassination attempt made by one of Duke Michael Hanse Davion's minions, who was also pushing forward his own political agenda within the Federated Sons. The early months of Hanse's reign were very stressful ones, and he would need all his skills learned both as a commander and a military governor to protect his rightful claim for the throne. As 3013 was closing, Hanse ended up working upon finalizing his brother's plan for a raid on Alstade Station and its recently discovered university from the Star League era. As preparations were made on the world of Attic for the major attack, Hanse Davion started a relationship with Dana Stephenson, a major winning the 34th Avalon Hussars, and the marriage proposal was made during the Christmas ball on December 3013. At the start of January 3014, First Prince Hanse Davion landed on Alstead Station with 3 mech regiments, leading from the front and fighting together with his fiancée. As the Davion forces prepared themselves to evacuate the planet with the documents and book looted from the old university, Coordinator Takashi Kurita went on the offensive, and soon enough, Hanse's forces were under heavy fire. During the last stand, field-promoted Colonel Dana Stephenson Enforcer was shut down, and her cockpit was crushed by a Kuritan Awesome in full view avance. It took the combined effort of his old friend Arden Sortek and Major General Rance Felsner to bring him out of his shock as dropships from Field Marshal Ivan Davion, now his own Prince Champion, arrived as reinforcements and managed to save the day for the remaining Davion forces. Despite coming back to the Federated Sons as the victor of Alstead Station, Hanse Davion had now to process the death of his fiancée. He later renamed his battlemaster as Dana and had a small figurine made in his office in her honor, modeled after an holographic image of their couple during the Christmas ball of 3013 and containing the engagement ring itself. In the following years, the entire nation seemed to hold its breath as both Hanse and Michael Hanse Davion wrestled for control of key positions within the federal government. However, Hanse Davion quickly adapted to his new position while dealing with numerous assassination attempts on himself. As he ended up guiding his realm through the final years of the Third Succession War, Hanse followed his father's policy to reduce the power and influence of the lower nobility within the Federated Sons, while concentrating his own family power in the Cruces March. When the dust settled, First Prince Hanse Davion has succeeded in assuming an almost complete control of the federal government, while Duke Michael Hanse Davion was left isolated and much weaker since their initial clash in the Capellan March. On 3015, First Prince Hanse Davion announced the creation of a new College of Science with the establishment of the New Avalon Institute of Science, one of the very first founded across the Inner in the last centuries, which would soon enough be a competitor with the old and prestigious Albion Military Academy as the best institution within the Federated Sons and the Inner premier bastion of higher learning and lost tech recovery. Since his early years of reign, Hanse lived up to his early reputation as a talented, unorthodox leader. Due to his brother Ian's initial overtures toward Archon Katrina Steiner of the Lyran Commonwealth, he was able to continue this policy and establish new ones, which began to revitalize the long-stagnant Federated Sons economy. The AFFS grew stronger as well, almost daily with the establishment of new policies concerning its military structure and development on new equipment. During that time, one of his best internal politics stunts was in regard to Baroness Robin de Caster, one of his vocal critics concerning the nation's poor educational system, by appointing her as his new Minister of Education. Soon enough, she worked hard with the federal government for the people's benefits, particularly the poor outback worlds with the rise of the vagabond schools system, which was seen at the time as one of the Ministry of Education's most effective policies put in place. Though he was still a relatively young man, Hanse Davion had done much already for the Federated Sons, capitalizing on the initial work done by his predecessors, but he was still capable of thriving for much more. His most far-sighted and grandest political move was done soon after, in the diplomatic arena of the Inner Sphere, when he responded favorably to Archon Katrina Steiner's peace proposal in 3020, which began a cordial relationship for the next 2 years. This open discussion between both House Lords concerning the future of their respective nations made them travel in early spring of 3022 to Terra itself and sign the Federated Commonwealth Alliance document, also known as the FedCom Accords. This treaty formalized a military, scientific, and economic exchange between their two states for the coming years. But the most impactful and secretive provision was the marriage of Hanse Davion himself to Archondignate Melissa Steiner, which promised the unification of two great houses into a vast political entity, the Federated Commonwealth. Despite that, the Federated Sons' position was still precarious. While the conflict against the Draconis Combine still went on, the Capellan March situation has gone from bad to worse, to the point that Hanse Davion expanded the role of all mercenary units employed by the AFFS, encouraging their initiative and independent actions, so they could keep the pressure on his enemies without exhausting his own military. These actions provoked in 3022 the Capellan Confederation to let loose their very own best mercenary units, the McCarran Armored Cavalry, in one of the greatest raids executed during the Third Succession War, later called the McCarran Long March. On numerous border systems with House Kurita, the struggle started to turn against the Federated Sons as the famed Wolf Dragoons were hired by the Draconis Combine in 3023 to face against their initial employer on the unit's first appearance in the Inner Sphere almost 2 decades ago. Despite this setback, First Prince Hanse Davion made it known publicly that he intended to take back the worlds taken by the Dragon during the First Succession War. This surprising boast was very unexpected, even across the Federated Sons, as the border with the Combine was settling down for another exchange of heavy raids since the past 5 years. If Hanse Davion seemed content at first to let the situation remain the same, his attitude was only a facade for a major campaign, the last significant one of the Third Succession War, which took place inside Galtor's system in 3025. By leaking the existence of a fake Starleague cache on Galtor 3, Hanse hoped to ensnare a few DCMS regiments and ambush them planet-side with his own hidden reinforcements. While the Combine took the bait, they landed with 5 full regiments, as Davion's own engineers were now discovering an actual Starleague installation on the planet itself. Soon enough, the Federation units were fighting for their survival, as First Prince Hanse Davion became unresponsive on any demand regarding the current campaign, which was quickly followed by diplomatic strains between him and his Lyran allies in the coming months. However, Hanse Davion soon recovered from his short period of delirium, and Curitan forces ended up with no other choice but to retreat from the Galtor system with heavy casualties. While it was kept in the dark for many years, the truth was that Hanse Davion fell victim at that time to Chancellor Maximilian Niao's plot to replace him with a body double. If successful, codename Operation Doppelganger would have put a Capellan puppet on the throne of the Federated Sons and spelled disaster for House Davion. Only the direct intervention of his personal friend Arden Sortek, who uncovered the transpiring plot, freed Hanse Davion and allowed him to prove his identity. While the Capellan plot was foiled, the close call made Hanse Davion set his sight on the Capellan Confederation instead of the Draconis Combine, swearing privately there would soon be a reckoning for the attempt against his own person. Even with the drive from this new ambition, Hanse Davion was still a careful planner and did his best not to reveal his next scheme. For this purpose, he used the Alliance Games, a series of small-scale war games between the LCAF and AFFS units done since 3024 to stage numerous major military exercises near both Kurita and Liao borders under the name Operation Galahad in 3026. As expected, both the CCAF and DCMS went on high alert, convinced the Davion exercises were a cover for an offensive. As both House Kurita and Liao issued widespread condemnations for this conduct by the First Prince, little did they know that despite his proclamations that those exercises were done for defensive purposes only, Hanse Davion was actually massing troops along the Capellan border for a future invasion as he was parading them up and down the borders in front of hundreds of holocams for the entire hemisphere to see. In the following years, since Operation Doppelganger, First Prince Hanse Davion became aware by his director of MIIO, Minister Quintus Allard, that his brother-in-law was sharing key diplomatic and military information with agents of the Confederation to undermine his federal authority, and most likely with the aim to usurp the throne. However, instead of rooting out any potential spy network based on those findings, Hanse discovered as well that Michael Hanse Davion was providing false reports himself, most of them undermining his own troop strength across the Capellan March. Seeing an opportunity in his hands, the First Prince decided to make the most of it by giving false information to his brother-in-law, little by little, as not to raise any suspicion from the Maskirovka, the Confederation Intelligence Agency. To add insult to injury, Hanse transferred his own heir designated to the Prisdom, Morgan Hanse Davion, son of his political rival, to finish his studies at the New Avalon Institute of Science. Upon his graduation, Morgan was then transferred to the Davion AV Guards, RCD, making the capital of the Federated Sons his home. This decision was meant first to keep his brother-in-law in line, but as time went on, Morgan grew more estranged with his father as his own devotion to the Federated Sons and House Davion became a core part of his character. Hanse will repay his loyalty with genuine friendship as they spend more time together. When it came to scheming, Hanse Davion wasn't idle either across the hemisphere. He capitalized on his MIIO earlier successes during the Entente Revolt to keep the Free World League in a state of disarray by supporting rebel factions within its border. He also contributed in small ways to the degrading relations between House Kurita and the Wolves Dragoons, especially since the mercenary unit's contract with the Combine was about to be expired in the following years. The year 3028 would be the one when First Prince Hanse Davion made his greatest mark in human history, as he officially announced across the hemisphere his marriage and invited all House Lords and their retinues to come to Terra itself and celebrate the event. On the 20 August 3028, he married Melissa Steiner in the presence of all successor lords, and during the reception following the ceremony, he gave to his bride a monumental wedding present, the Capellan Confederation. With that single declaration, Hanse Davion was launching Operation Rat, the AFFS invasion of House Liao, and thus started the Fourth Secession War. The Fourth Secession War was to be a conflict that changed the hemisphere as it has never done before across the current era, as it brought back strategic warfare to the center stage, making First Prince Hanse Davion and his generals the fathers of modern warfare ever since. The successes of Operation Rat brought almost the Capellan Confederation to ruin, with most of its territory now under Davion's control or seceded under the Tikhonov Free Republic and the Saint-Yves Compact. The Terran Corridor was now more secure than ever, with both states of the Federated Commonwealth finally interconnected to each other. By the time the Fourth Succession War ended with the signature of the Comstar Peace Pact on 19 February 3030, First Prince Hanse Davion has broken the Capellan state so much that Chancellor Maximilian Liao was mentally broken, and his brother-in-law Michael Asik Davion was finally outsmarted at his own scheme and ended up being executed. His treachery to the Federated Sons made official many years later after the conflict. Most of all, the birth of Hanse Davion and Melissa Steiner Davion, first child, mark as well the coming of a new dynasty among the House Lords, which would shape the Ionosphere drastically in the coming decades. Although mostly considered as the clear winner by the end of the Fourth Succession War, First Prince Hanse Davion wasn't as victorious as he was perceived in the following years. This brief and brutal conflict has already forced the Federated Sons into a rationing system by the end of November 3028. When Comstar imposed to them an interdiction of their communication systems on May 3029, numerous planets were severely affected by it across the Federated Sons. And soon enough, the entire nation suffered a severe economic depression for many long years before there were signs of a recovery, even provided with Lyran assistance. On the diplomatic side, while Hanse did annex legally the short-lived Tikhonov Free Republic by 3031, along with the majority of the Capellan territories conquered by his troops, all of it went to his fiancée, Melissa Steiner Davion, who, facing with the abuse of power from the occupying Davion commanders in her new Sarnar March, decided to replace them with Lyran troops to ensure peace and stability in the conquered territories. Although she led the secession of her Saint-Yves commonalty from the Confederation, Duchess Candace Liao publicly declared her refusal to support any military action against the now weakened Capellan nation and worked tirelessly for her nation to not be a Davion puppet state. In short, even though the Fourth Succession War was a huge military success across the Succession Wars era, First Prince Hanse Davion was aware this conflict could have turned against him in so many ways. Furthermore, while Hanse Davion became the closest of any House Lords to unite the Ionosphere under one banner with Operation Rat, he also became by default the greatest threat for any and all factions across the human sphere. The unexpected attack on NAIS grounds on New Avalon itself in September 3029, which forced Hanse Davion to once again pilot his battlemaster on the field of battle and fiercely defend his own life against House Liao's Death Commandos, was unwittingly the beginning of a Cold War between Comstar and the Federated Commonwealth. This war of shadows between ROM and MIIO dealt a serious blow to his initial abilities in intelligence gathering, infiltration, or simply being able to cause internal conflict among his enemies by supporting dissident entities, which blinded him more often than not in the following decades. At the start of the 3030s, apart from Takashi Kurita, First Prince Hanse Davion found himself being a senior House Lord competing with a new generation of leaders on the interstellar stage, many of whom have learned much of Hanse's methodology and even taken inspiration from him. Thomas Marek, formerly from Comstar, took the throne of the Free World League in 3036 during the Indurian Wars and instituted numerous reforms to centralize powers within the state in the hands of the Captain General, while mitigating nationalist concern among its member states. Appointed Primus in 3029, Mindo Waterley secretively led Comstar out of its neutral policy and supported numerous plots aimed at hindering the Federated Commonwealth, the most significant of which was her official support in the establishment of the Free Rashagal Republic throughout 3034, which took off a large portion of the systems conquered by its Steiner ally during the Fourth Succession War. Duke Ryan Steiner also took advantage of Hanse's harsh military measures to gain political capital when the Sky Crisis occurred following the birth of the Rashahalgian nation. Among all of them, his greatest rival would be Prince Theodore Kurita, heir to the Coordinator, and at the time Gunji no Kanrei, or Deputy of Military Affairs. A veteran commander who distinguished himself with his victories in the last Succession War, a rarity for the Combine at the time, Theodore Kurita throughoutly reformed the DCMS into an efficient fighting force. But aside from the Runin War, when he provided support to the Free Rashahalg Republic with military troops, little was gathered for Hanse to better understand the scope of these changes within this last great house that could rival him. When First Prince Hanse Davion initiated the War of 3039 with the aim at finishing off House Kurita once and for all, if not severely weakening it as he did with House Liao a decade before, he quickly found himself caught off guard when his troops faced numerous unknown regiments of battle mechs with models dating back to the Star League era. Theodore's strong counterattack caught the Fedcom troops so off guard that Hanse Davion hesitated long enough to conclude that he would rather halt his military operation and consolidate his few gains than risk being bogged down in a war of attrition that his new nation was unprepared to face, let alone sustain. He concluded peace with the Draconis Combine through the Exeter Accords signed in January 3040. The 3040s were a strangely relaxed period for First Prince Hanse Davion, alternatively tending to his family, the affairs of his nation, and his own schemes for the next conflict that will allow him to defeat the Draconis Combine for good. Aside for a few border raids, the situation in the Inner Sphere seemed to be heading towards another period of low-level engagements. All the while their institutions were rediscovering lost technologies dating back from the Star League. Now ruling jointly with his wife the Federated Commonwealth, Hanse Davion was also preparing his descendants concerning their aspirations and obligations within the Steiner Davion dynasty as they were finishing their formative years. However, all those plans went to smoke as everything was turned upside down by the clan invasion. Caught off guard by the quick-paced offensive, Hanse Davion did his best to redeploy any and all available troops to the Lyran side of his vast empire. An urgency quadrupled with recent news that his first son and heir to the throne, Victor Steiner Davion, was reported being killed by the invaders from beyond the periphery. Although it was soon proven that Victor had been evacuated in time and thus the worst was averted, reports still came in filled with staggering losses to some levels not seen since the early Succession Wars, and Hanse has to maintain the pace of his hard work, at barely stemming an offensive made by an unknown enemy with capabilities and technologies far superior to anything his Fedcom could produce at the time. However, events took an unexpected turn when Colonel James Wolfe of the Wolf's Dragoons invited all House Lords on outreach to reveal the origins of the invaders, those of his own mercenary unit, and the fact that every interstellar nations of the inner sphere needed to band together to fight this threat or be conquered. Although the results of the outreach meeting were quite mixed, as he had to thwart several times the intrigues of Chancellor Romano Liao and forced Captain General Thomas Marek to contribute more to the war efforts in exchange for treatment to his own son Joshua for leukemia at the NAIS itself. First Prince Hanse Davion was also able to meet Prince Theodore Kurita and recognize a kindred spirit, with an assessment of the military situation similar to his own. Beyond the strained interrelationships between their respective offsprings during the meeting, Hanse and Theodore concluded a non-aggression pact to facilitate their military focus primarily against the clan invaders. This agreement thus allowed Hanse Davion to deploy more RCT units previously guarding the Kuritan border to bolster his own flank and provide better odds for his FedCom units to fight both the Jade Falcons and Steel Vipers. When he learned of the impending threat to Luthien, capital of the Dragonist Combine, Hanse Davion was able to look beyond his old grudges against his arch-nemesis and recognize that if the Combine was defeated too quickly, his own nation will find itself unable to counter the clans on such a widespread front. With this realization in mind, he swiftly enlisted the Wolf Dragoons and Calhoun mercenary units to quickly travel and assist House Kurita for the Battle of Luthien in 3051. Once again, he was later warned of Primus Mindo Waterley's schemes about Operation Scorpion, and thus was able to respond in time to counter Comstar's ambitions at imposing an interdiction across the entire Ionosphere in a bid to rule over all of them. Despite these reversals of fortune that went to his advantage and the military successes of his son Victor in those trying times, the general war against the clan invaders was a burden that slowly killed First Prince Hanse Davion, being overworked beyond more than a single year, protecting the best he can his nation. Because of the precarious situation, even if some glimmer of hope was emerging with the establishment of the Tukahid truce, Hanse Davion was totally unprepared when he received a private message from the newly appointed Chancellor of the Capellan Confederation, Sun Tzu Liao, announcing his upcoming marriage to Isis Marek, second in line to the Free Worlds League. The immense shock of the announcement, with its far-reaching political implications for the inner sphere, caused Hanse Davion to suffer a severe heart attack. Despite Victor's discovery of his condition inside his personal office and attempts to revive him by the team of doctors within the royal palace, Hanse Davion died in his eldest son's arms on 17th of June 3052. In the following weeks of its death, Hanse Davion received a head of state's funeral and was buried in the Davion family crypt in the royal palace grounds on New Avalon, with numerous delegations across the Federated Commonwealth and major houses showing up for the event. He was survived by his wife Melissa Steiner Davion and their 5 children. His eldest son, Victor Steiner Davion, succeeded him as House Lord for the Davion family and its side of the Federated Commonwealth in the following months. His battlemaster Dana would not be taken by his son Victor on the battlefield, but instead given away as a centerpiece for a war memorial built soon after on the grounds of the New Avalon Institute of Science. While Hanse Davion's legacy is mostly centered on his military successes in embracing the vision for a new political spectrum concerning the inner sphere during the final years of the Third Succession War, many also put the blame for the ravages and widespread destruction of the Fourth Succession War and the War of 3039 entirely on his shoulders. The same could be said about his personal interest to turn back the down spiral of lost technological knowledge across the Inner Sphere since the fall of the Star League. While his founding of the NAIS did help in the recovery of numerous lost techs, which improved the livelihood of numerous people across the human sphere, it also contributed to the development of new weapons, many lost long ago during the Succession Wars era, and the arms race that happened soon after throughout the Renaissance period and beyond. Despite those critics, Hanse Davion is still remembered among the greatest leaders Federated Suns had across its entire history. While his political acumen was seen as unmatched during his time and his unorthodox tactics are well known in numerous essays, it is of note to remember that Hanse himself was a very social and likable individual, making friends easily from people across various social classes or way of living, and gaining the grudging respect from his enemies. It is especially ironic to recognize that many leaders of the following generation across his rival states will be inspired by him and try to emulate his way of thinking. It will be his offspring that will end up falling short on that aspect, instead inheriting some of his best and worst traits to the extreme, from the naive noble warrior to the ambitious political schemer. In the following decades, most of his tremendous successes and work done ended up being wasted away, the worst being the centralization of his nation's political power in the hands of the first prince and any loyal retainer that were left unchecked autocratic tendencies, which led to the Fedcom civil war during the collapse period. Even as the Inner Sphere is now entering the L-Clan era, the Federated Suns is barely on the road of recovery from the poor management his numerous successors did with his legacy. However, people across the Federated Suns are still remembering fondly what they are now calling Hanse's Golden Age.